Last week, there was a major update in the Long Island serial killer case stemming out of New York. Originally in December 2010 and in the spring of 2011, the authorities discovered 10 sets of remains on the Ocean Parkway. What a lot of the people that had in common was that they operated in sex work. Now, the Gilgo 4, which were the women that were found in December of 2010, belonged to Melissa Barthélemy, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. They were all in their early 20s, all reasonably petite. I'm talking some of them under 5 feet tall. And then months later, the authorities found a man, a toddler, several skulls pertaining to different women, and bones in a bag of another woman. In July 2023, a suspect was arrested. His name is Rex Heuermann. He lived in Massapequa Park, Long Island. He was an architect working in Midtown Manhattan. Last week, this major development didn't involve Rex, who currently stands on 7 murder charges. This update involves the arrest of a Ruskin, Florida man by the name of Andrew Dykes. He is charged with the murder of Tanya Jackson. So Tanya was found on the Ocean Parkway. She was those set of bones that were found in a bag. And I had mentioned that there was a toddler discovered. She was around 2 years old, and she was found wrapped in a blanket. Early on in the Lisk investigation, the authorities would piece together that those bones in the bag were related to the toddler. But that's not the only crazy part. In a separate case from June 1997, in Lakeview, New York, some 15 miles away from Ocean Parkway, in a park, some people discovered an abandoned Rubbermaid container that had a mutilated torso in it of what was a mixed race woman. The only distinguishing factor about this person was that there was a tattoo of peaches on her left breast. There weren't many developments for a long time, although in 1998, that tattoo was profiled in a tattoo magazine in which an artist reached out to the Long Island authorities and said that he believes that he had tattooed this person in 1996. She was a black woman, may have been 18 to 19. There were 2 female relatives by her side. She was going through boyfriend problems. And artists assumed that, she was living in Long Island. So that was the only really lead that came out of the Peaches case. In 2016, the authorities would announce that the case of Peaches from Lakeview is the same person that is the mother, and the person that was found with the bones in the bag, that is the same woman who is the mother of the toddler. And now, earlier this year, the Long Island authorities announced that Peaches and her daughter, their names were Tanya Jackson, who was 26 years old at the time of her murder, and Tatiana Dykes, who was 2 years old. I had mentioned that Andrew Dykes was arrested. He was from Ruskin, Florida. He fathered Tatiana, but Tanya and him met in the army. Some kind of tryst happened that produced the child. From what I hear, Andrew is married with kids. That's why I say tryst, because there is a new article out of Newsday where one of Andrew's sons has spoken out in defense of his father. I'm very curious to see what is the evidence that ties him to Tanya, because he's currently not charged for his daughter's murder, but I do have questions there. The son did say in this article that he tried reaching out to a lady on Facebook, seeing if that was Tanya. I just want to know, did Andrew actively try to find his daughter all these years later? She would have turned 30 this year. That's one thing. What is the evidence against Andrew? That is one piece of the puzzle in Lisk. As I had stated, Rex is charged with 7 murder counts, that of the Gilgo 4. All of these women, they had many commonalities, and they had been advertising themselves on Craigslist and Backpage for adult services. A great piece of work you should check out, highly, highly recommend, is Lost Girls by Robert Kolker. This book came out in 2013, and it details the Lisk investigation, when it all started. Who were these young women that put themselves in these dangerous positions to make money? Melissa, she had a stable upbringing. She was from Buffalo. She graduated from high school. She was attending college for cosmetology and worked a little bit in there where she was from. But in 2006, she moved to New York City. Her family thought the whole time that she was working at a hair salon, but in actuality, she was involved in the sex trade. The last year of her life, she was advertising herself on these websites. And then I mentioned Maureen, who was out of Connecticut. She was a single mother of 2 kids. And at the time, she was having a hard time finding work. It wasn't stable for a while there. And she was facing eviction in July of 2007 when she traveled to New York City with a friend who was also dealing with the sex trade. That weekend, it was a light one at that. Not many calls, but they were still in the city to make money. On that Sunday, her friend left to go back home in Connecticut, and for whatever reason, Maureen stayed, I guess, to make more money because there wasn't a lot of activity over the weekend. The last that anyone heard from her was the next day, right before midnight. And she was actually the first person to go missing in 2007. And then after that was Melissa. And then the remaining 2 was Megan out of Maine, another single mom. She didn't have a stable upbringing, but once she gave birth to her daughter, she wanted to make something out of herself. She fell into escorting. In June of 2010, she traveled to Long Island with her boyfriend, who's, had his own bad reputation, dealing with drugs, getting arrested. They went to Long Island so she could, make some money. She was last seen on CCTV footage from the hotel, and she walked out. That was the last that anyone saw of her. And then in September, Amber was the last of the Gilgo 4 to disappear. She, at the time, was dealing with addiction. Her sister Kim was living in Long Island, but she too was involved with the trade and dealing with her own addiction as well. Amber, was divorced and trying to make something out of her life in Long Island. And she too came across the Long Island serial killer. What ties Rex to these girls was the cell phone activity. He had a burner phone and a cell phone, and this task force were able to trace that from his home in Massapequa and then Midtown where he worked. That activity match of the cell phone evidence of the Gilgo 4. With Maureen and Melissa, he accessed their voicemails that the cops were able to trace were in Long Island, and these women weren't known to do outcalls all the way far there. In the case of Melissa, Rex actually called her family, in specific from Melissa's phone, taunting them, in specific her little sister, and he even called Melissa's on and off again boyfriend. Rex did the same to Maureen's friend, who was the one who went with her that last weekend she was alive. Her name was Sarah, and he called her from Maureen's phone. He wasn't as taunting, but he did say that she's in a whorehouse in Queens. I did state that all this started with the disappearance of a woman by the name of Shannon Gilbert on May 1st, 2010, after visiting a client in Oak Beach, not far from Gilgo Beach. This is a wealthy gated community. The client was noticing that she was acting erratically, probably under the influence of some substances. She didn't want to leave. He called to the attention of her driver, Michael, and she wasn't faring out well. She called 911, ran out of his residence. This is like very early in the morning, in the dark. She knocks on neighbors' doors. One of them being Gus Coletti. He tries to soothe her. He calls 911. Shannon runs out. She knocks on another door of a woman who also calls 911. And in the middle of this chaos, Michael tries to find Shannon, but she vanishes. So that was in May, and then that December is when the authorities find the Gilgo 4. And then in 2011, Shannon still doesn't show up. And one of the distinguishing factors about Shannon, if they had come across her corpse, was that she had a titanium plate in her jaw, because unfortunately there was a domestic violence issue of some sort where she came home late one day, woke up her boyfriend, and she was trying to start a fight, and he accidentally punched her, and her jaw was fractured as she had to get a plate. December 2011, Shannon's remains were found in Oak Beach in the marsh. People think it might have been murder. Some people think it was misadventure, accidental drowning. I know that her belongings were found not far from her skeletal remains. During this time, her family was fighting for answers, going to Oak Beach, traveling 3 hours away from Ellenville, New York. Her mom, Mary Gilbert, was a crusader the whole time, trying to find answers. Shannon had 3 sisters. In 2016, a major development out of nowhere happens. Shannon's sister, Sarah, murders Mary Gilbert. She was stabbed 227 times. Apparently, Sarah was going through schizophrenia. She had an episode and committed this terrible homicide. Currently, Sarah is serving a 25-year prison sentence. So this family has gone through a lot between Shannon's death and then Mary being murdered. It was just a lot. Going back to Rex, who stands on 7 murder charges, that of the Gilgo 4. There is the 5th person, Jessica Taylor. Her skull was found on Ocean Parkway on March 29th, 2011. And the authorities were able to piece together that her case was tied to one from July 2003 in Manorville, New York, which is nearly an hour away. There was a mutilated torso discovered. She had a tattoo on her back that was disfigured. The killer was trying to, conceal what that was, but the cops were able to trace that it was angel wings, and it said Remy's Angel. For a few months, nobody knew who this person was, but a detective out of Washington, D.C. reached out to Long Island authorities and believed that this was a 20-year-old woman by the name of Jessica Taylor. Originally, Jessica was from Poughkeepsie, New York, 90 miles away from New York City, but she had been living in Washington, D.C. for a brief time. And sometime before her death, she was operating as a sex worker near the Port Authority bus terminal. And somehow, some way, she came across Rex Heuermann. The other murder charge is on Valerie Mack. Her skull, hands, and feet were discovered on Ocean Parkway, actually 250 feet away from Tatiana Dykes, the toddler. And her case stemmed from one when she was originally found in November 2000 in Manorville, New York, the same location as Jessica Taylor, not far from the dump site. Valerie's mutilated torso was discovered in the woods. Nobody knew who she was for a long time. And then 2011 happens. They find her second set of remains. What's interesting, much like Jessica, is that she had a tattoo on her ankle, and Rex cut off what authorities believe with a saw. Cut off parts of her body to conceal that tattoo, which ended up, I'm sure, on Ocean Parkway. And for a long time, nobody knew her name until May of 2020 through genetic genealogy. They were able to piece together that Valerie was a 24-year-old woman out of New Jersey. She had a few arrests dealing with prostitution. She was operating out of New Jersey and Pennsylvania back and forth. Somehow found her way to New York City and crossed paths with Rex Heuermann. And then the last murder charge that he has actually doesn't have to do with a person in this whole Ocean Parkway investigation, because the cops found an article from 1993 about a woman's murder in Southampton, Long Island, which is on the eastern end. This woman, she was 28, a native of Trinidad and Tobago, but she had been living in New York for some time. This woman was found with like her shirt over her head, I guess naked on the waist down. She was disfigured in her face, genitals, and breasts. And through DNA testing, they were able to piece that Rex did it. Those are the 7 murder charges. There is Asian Doe, who remains to be identified. There was another woman in 2023 that was identified, and much like Jessica and Valerie, her remains stem from a case in 1996 where her legs were found severed on Fire Island, and then in 2011, the rest of her was discovered on Ocean Parkway. In 2023, the authorities pieced her name. She disappeared in 1996, last heard of from her dad. Bex is not charged with her murder. So there's a lot to uncover with the Long Island serial killer case, especially with the arrest of Andrew Dykes, while Rex is in jail awaiting his own charges. If there's an update, I'll come back here and bring those developments. That is my take on this news. Thank you for watching.